listening to The Motherhood Experience, a podcast where you are part of the conversation with moms, for moms, and by moms. Let's jump into this episode with me, your host, Val Kleppen. Hello, friends. Welcome to the Motherhood Experience podcast. I am your host, Val Kleppen. Today, I do not have a guest. Today is a little different of an episode, and I wasn't sure whether or not I would do this. I prayed about it. I wrestled over it, and I thought, you know what? I feel like I'm supposed to do this. So I don't know what this episode is going to look like or portray or share. I'm just going to kind of ramble off the cuff, but it is October. A couple of days ago was Pregnancy and Infant Loss Awareness Day. October is Pregnancy and Infant Loss Awareness Month, and I have been a bereaved mother for 10 years. And though October Awareness Month and Awareness Day are always there, I don't need them personally to be aware of it because it's my life every day. Recently, my husband and I went to see the movie Sound of Freedom, wonderfully made movie if you get a chance to go see it. But within the first 15 minutes of it, I had to force myself to stay in my seat. It was so uncomfortable for me to watch, knowing that this was real life, knowing that we live in a world where human beings, namely children, are trafficked and tortured. For me to sit in that theater seat and watch this movie was physically uncomfortable for me. And when we left the theater, I thought to myself, it's so uncomfortable for me because that is not the world that's not the life that I live. All I know about it are things that I read, movies like that, but my mind and heart protect themselves by not allowing them to go there, to think about that, to dwell in that space. And I left that theater thinking, that has got to be what it feels like for other people who are not bereaved parents when others share about their journey of losing a baby. It has to be physically uncomfortable. You know it exists. You know it happens in the world, but your mind and heart shut down to protect you from having to dwell in that until or unless you happen to be one of the ones who dwell in that. I left that movie theater with kind of a new perspective and appreciation for those who have never walked this road. And I'm not going to tell the story. I'm not going to recount our experience in the hospital when Harlynn died. I've told that story many times over the last 10 years. And maybe in the show notes, I'll leave a link to the blog post that I wrote moments after delivering her. But I think what I wanted to share today was just what the last 10 years have looked like as a journey. There are things that really bothered me in the beginning that I don't necessarily think about much anymore. Things people would say, trying to help, but not. I was incredibly easily offended in those early days of bereavement. I remember hearing parents complain about their children and anger just burning inside of me because I was thinking I would give anything to have a baby keeping me up at night. I would give anything to have a sibling fight taking place in my living room. Parents complaining about their children's behavior today doesn't bother me, if they're just venting or whatever. But back then it definitely did. It definitely did. I was easily offended because my heart was so broken and raw. No one could win. No one could win. No one could win for trying to help me. No one could win for trying to be sensitive and avoiding me altogether. Everybody was wrong and ticked me off. That's not so much the story today. And I don't really know what I'm supposed to share. I guess I'll just kind of talk through the journey. Those early days, weeks, months were insufferable. There's a period of mourning, and mourning and grief are two very different things. And there's a period of mourning that I was not anticipating and certainly not expecting to last as long as it did. Many bereaved parents will tell you that 6-month mark, man, your body, grief is still manifesting physically in your body. I remember after Harlynn died, my forearms ached for weeks. And it was almost as if my body knew that my arms could not hold my baby, and they just ached. And grief will physically show up in your body. But that 6 month mark, intense brain fog, lethargy, anger, grief, sadness, everything. I remember in support group, I led support group for 5 years before we moved. And just about every bereaved parent who was in support group at that 6 month mark was like, I don't know what's happening. I felt like I was doing good and now I'm not. And we would say, how much time has it been? Oh, 6 months. Everybody in the room would be like, oh, yeah, that's 6 month mark. And then something begins to shift and you just go through these weird milestones. So for me, Harlynn's birthday every year was really, really hard. However, harder than her birthday, which is documented as April 10th because I delivered her at 12:16 a.m. on April 10th. But harder for me than the 10th is the night because that's the day we learned her heart stopped beating and I went into labor and all these terrible experiences started April 9th. When I got pregnant with Harlynn, I had this, I won't say that I had a feeling that something was wrong because that wasn't it, but something about the pregnancy felt very different and not in a good way. Her older sister, our firstborn, was born 2 months premature. She spent the first 30 days of her life in the NICU. I had HELP syndrome. It was an emergency cesarean. She was delivered weighing 2 pounds, 12 ounces. She was itty bitty. I nearly died. I remember Brent taking a picture of me on the hospital bed and saying, here's a picture of Val on her deathbed, which, why would you say that? There was so much going on. And sometimes you just say things, but it was true. I was so sick and very close to not coming out of that hospital. And then I ended up pregnant again. I remember I found out on a Friday morning, very early in the morning. In fact, Annette from episode 5 was in that accountability group. I remember it was a Friday because we got together at 6 a.m. on Fridays, and I was headed to that group when I found out I was pregnant. I walked into the bedroom, woke my husband up and told him I'm pregnant. And he grabbed my hands and prayed over me. And later that day, another friend of ours in that group called me, found out that she was miscarrying, and asked if I would come sit with her. And of course, I said yes. And I went and sat with her, having no idea that that would be the first time of many that I would sit alongside and just share in the grief of bereaved parents. I also remember a coworker. I think I was maybe 6 or 7 months pregnant with Harlynn, and a coworker came into my office and sat down and shared a story about how at the gym his wife asked this little kid, oh, where's your baby brother or sister? And they said the baby died and the baby had been stillborn. And I looked at my coworker and I said, can you imagine being pregnant, carrying your baby to term, only to have it die? And he said, no, I can't imagine that. I said, neither can I. Little did I know that that would be my story mere months later. So April 9th is always harder for me than April 10th, but I appreciate that because April 9th has just kind of been my day to process and to grieve losing our daughter. And then April 10th, if people remember, which is, it's been 10 years now, fewer and fewer people remember as the years go on. But if they remember, April 10th is their day. It's their day to remember. But I get April 9th to suffer and to process and to work through the anxiety of it all. Anticipatory grief is a real thing. I guess also I'll mention that I became pregnant with our son really unintentionally. We weren't sure if we could go through. We had 2 traumatic pregnancies, one where I essentially should have died and didn't, and another where our baby died. We weren't sure we could do it again. And I ended up pregnant again. And that pregnancy was, I don't even know if there's a word that can truly encapsulate. It's the closest thing to hell on earth that I can probably fathom. I was terrified every day. I was always hoping for the best, but expecting the worst at every appointment. And there were complications. There were complications in that pregnancy as well. So it was hell. It was hell. I had a really hard time bonding while I was pregnant. And if I could not feel him moving, I was terrified. He moved so often, praise God. And I remember I would wake up at night. He was so mobile and strong. I would wake up in the middle of the night and he would be moving around and pushing me up off the bed. I don't know if he was doing the leg presses or bench press. I don't know what he was doing, but he essentially was bench pressing his mother in the middle of the night. And he was born 5 weeks early, emergency cesarean. Turns out he had a short umbilical cord. His diastolic flow. Well, now I'm getting into the weeds of it doesn't matter. He's here. He's safe. He's 9 years old. But that pregnancy was awful. And there were times where I didn't understand my grief. Grief became a familiar foe, but I welcomed its presence because of the familiarity. And also, my grief was really the only tangible connection I had to my daughter. My husband and I processed through our grief very differently from one another. I have always been an emotionally expressive individual. He has not. I have always wanted to feel justified in my feelings, him not so much. So there was a real push and pull, honestly, as we were both processing this. Now, I will say my husband was and has been a tremendous support for me as we walked this journey for the last 10 years now. We just walk it very differently. And on what would have been Harlynn's first birthday, I was in the hospital with them trying to stop preterm labor of her brother, who at that time was 32 weeks and 6 days, which was the exact age where his oldest sister was delivered. And I remember my OB saying, he can't come today. He can't come today, because she knew that was Harlynn's birthday. They stopped the labor. He came, I think, 2 weeks later, 2 weeks later. On her second birthday, I felt like I'd been robbed of a life of one of my children. And I felt like I'd been robbed of a chance to do anything special or make anything of what would have been her first birthday. So her second birthday, I just kind of was like, I don't know what to do. I think we just left cupcakes on her headstone. And her third birthday, I remember coming out into the living room and my husband was in the kitchen and his eyes were red. And I looked at him and said, "Are you okay?" And he told me, while being very choked up, that sometimes, this is what he said, "Sometimes I put her in a box and I don't want to take her out because it's really hard. But when I do take her out, it makes me sad." And I remember thinking, like, it took 3 years for me to finally understand how my husband processes through grief. Whereas I was just, in Bible times when they had like professional wailers, that was me, man. Every day crying, who wants to cry with me kind of a thing. It took 3 years for me to see how my husband processed things. I have no boxes in my brain. It's nothing but spaghetti noodles that are all intertwined with one another. And there's no sense in trying to pull one out, because if you pull on one, you're pulling on everything. And that's dangerous. That's dangerous. So there were different things that would really set off my grief. If I saw a child, I remember I was driving somewhere when Harlynn would have been about 4 and seeing a little girl who was about 4 and just falling apart. Those kinds of things don't trigger my grief anymore. And I will say, 10 years on, it's very different. I will never be freed from all of the weight of what it is to carry through life missing one of your children. That will always be with me. It's a part of me. But I have learned better over these last 10 years how to carry it. There are times, like, for instance, let me tell you the story of what would have been Harlyn's 7th birthday. Every year, her birthday was very, very hard for me. April 9th was always the hardest, but her birthday was still hard for me. What would have been her 7th birthday was in 2020. We were in Minnesota. We were under a shelter in place. I don't know what it was, like recommendation. I don't know, whatever. We were told to shelter in place. I was looking exceptionally rough that day. I know I didn't shower. I don't think I fixed my hair. I definitely was wearing sweatpants, and I was walking around our property just kind of making laps and just lamenting, sobbing in my chicken boots and everything. And I was in the back of the property, and I came around the front of the house and I saw a pickup in our driveway, and my eyes went from the pickup to our front door, and I saw standing at our front door one of our board members from Harlan's Heart. And this guy, I'll tell you, is like the brother I never had. So I see him standing on our front porch, and he's got flowers in one hand and a loaf of banana chocolate chip bread in the other. And he sets him down and he walks down the stairs. He meets me in the front yard and just hugs me. And not like, I'm so sorry, I know today is hard for you hug, but like a giant, ain't nobody gonna get through me to get to you kind of brother bear hug. And I just wept on his shoulder. I wept. There were tears and snot everywhere. It was a literal mess. And the first thing he said to me as he's hugging me is, "We're not supposed to be doing this because it was COVID. We were in a shelter in place, yada, yada." And I just said, "I don't care. I needed this." And he said, "I know." And there was something that shifted that day. I couldn't tell you what. I don't know. I don't know what it was, but there was something about her 7th birthday where I could sense that things were going to change. A new leaf was turning and things were going to be different. I didn't know what. I didn't know good or bad. I just knew things were going to be different, which also was part of why that day was exceptionally hard for me that year, because I felt like I've only known this for 7 years, and now I sense that there's a shift in something different. So I'm also grieving the loss of all of this familiarity. It's a big mess when you lose someone. It's a big mess. Also, that banana chocolate chip bread that he brought, I don't know where he got it from, but it was amazing. And had it been anyone else who had come, it would have been sweet. It would have been meaningful. But having it be him who came to love on me and Brent that day, I will never forget it. I will never forget it. After that same year, we ended up moving to South Dakota, which was wonderful. And also, I was not sure how that would feel. I was going to be moving 300 miles away from where my daughter was buried. I would not be able to just pick up and go to her spot. I would not be able to decorate it whenever I felt like it. I would not be able to change out decorations for seasons or holidays. And I wasn't sure how to process through that either. But when we moved here, I remember sitting outside and just feeling like she's as much here as she was with us in North Dakota and Minnesota. I just feel her as a part of our family all the time. But that following spring, for what would have been her 8th birthday, I didn't know what else to do other than to go to her spot, because that's what I did every year for her birthday. So I took a solo trip to Fargo. Some friends of ours had gone on vacation and their house was completely open and available for me to use, which ended up being perfect. Once again, on April 9th, I was a wreck. I was a wreck in that guest bed, just wrenched with grief and processing, like, what does our life look like now? I mean, I can't just make a solo trip up here every year for her birthday. What is this going to look like? And the next day, on April 10th, I went to her spot, took her some birthday donuts, went to her spot, sang, and got through Happy Birthday for the first time in 8 years. I had never been able to complete that song for her on her birthday prior. Completed the song and just felt like I was released. I don't know what else to say, but like I was released from the obligation or responsibility to go to her spot on her birthday every year. Almost like it was a box that I checked every year, but this time that box wouldn't be unchecked ever again. It was checked and would stay checked. And I could go if I want, but I didn't have to anymore at that point. And it was bittersweet, but I guess I didn't realize until it happened how much I needed that release. On her 9th birthday, we did something completely different. We had always isolated ourselves on her birthday just because we weren't sure what it was going to be for us. And on her 9th birthday, we invited friends over and we planted elderberry bushes. Now, our soil here is pitiful. Those elderberry bushes ended up dying later that summer, which of course they would. But it was a tender time to be able to share a remembrance of the darkest day of our life with people who were close to us and new in this journey with us. This year, on what would have been her 10th birthday, her 10th birthday was Easter Monday. So April 9th, again, always harder for me. That was Easter Sunday, and we were in church, and it was awful for me. Worship was wonderful and amazing, but I wept. I could not even stand up. I was so wrecked in emotion. And I think part of it now, 10 years in, it's not just sadness. It's also, there's a longing, there's confusion, there's so much. It's so messy. It's so messy. And that's one thing I would always tell parents in support group is you need to give yourself freedom to grieve messy. No one else is going to give you that freedom. And there's this stage where you had life before this happened and now life after this happened. And the only way to get from what used to be to what is now is to walk through that messy middle. I have done so much walking through that messy middle. I have given presentations to nursing classes at different universities on how to care for patients who are suddenly bereaved. I have done presentations on stillbirth. I have done presentations on grief. I have done presentations on faith in the midst of grief and suffering. I've done all the talks. I've been cited, quoted, but 10 years later, I'm here sitting telling you, I don't know how to do this. I don't know what any given day will bring or be or present. I will forever be a part of this family of 5 minus 1. And there are all kinds of nuances when you're a bereaved parent. Like when someone asks you, how many kids do you have? Well, how are we going to address that one? It depends. It depends on who asks the question. I'm not as easily offended by offhanded remarks that people say. I'm not triggered by seeing, if there were a 10-year-old girl in here today, I wouldn't be upset. And time does not heal all wounds, but it does change them. And I guess I don't really know what I wanted or needed to accomplish in this episode today, but I just felt like I can't ignore or avoid the significance of what this month is for so many families. 1 in 4 pregnancies ends in loss. 1 in 4 pregnancies, not 1 in 4 women experience loss. 1 in 4 pregnancies. Anyone listening to this knows someone who has lost a baby. And I'm not just talking about me because I've told you. You know someone who has had a miscarriage. You know someone who has had a baby born with genetic defects and passed away. You know someone who has lost a baby or a pregnancy unexpectedly. 1 in 4 pregnancies. And just like sitting and watching that movie, Sound of Freedom, and being made to feel completely uncomfortable by the reality of human trafficking, I am sure that someone listening to this has been made completely uncomfortable sitting and listening to someone share about their story of losing their baby. I remember feeling like when I went back to work, like I had a contagious disease. I had people in my office every single day just to shoot the breeze. My office was a lot of fun until my daughter died. No one came in to sit in my office anymore. I would walk down the hallway. People would look at watches they weren't wearing to avoid making eye contact with me. I felt like they felt like if I look at her or talk to her, then my child will die too. That's what I felt like. But now, and that would tick me off. But now, if you don't know how to respond or how to react when you find out this about me, I'm not going to hold that against you. I can't, because you don't know. When we moved here, we met a couple and I found out that she, the wife, had 11 pregnancy losses. 11. She had four kids, 4 living children, and 11 pregnancy losses. I am a bereaved mother, and I didn't know how to respond when she told me that, other than to say, I am so sorry. What was that like for you? I can't imagine 11 losses. I have one. This path that I'm walking seemed impossible, unnavigable. Is that a word? It is now. And I never was suicidal, but I also, after it happened, did not have the desire really to live. I didn't want to take my life, but I didn't feel like living it either. But I had a daughter and a husband who relied on me and forced me out of bed. Praise God. I don't know if any of this makes sense to you or if you can relate to a single thing that I've said. But if you are a fellow bereaved parent, I just want to say this. I see you and I know that there are days that you don't know up from down. I know that there are seasons when you feel like the sun never shines. I know that there are times of chaos and confusion, of anger and resentment. I know there are times that you'll feel guilty for laughing or experiencing joy. And all I can offer you is reassurance in the fact that that's okay, the fact that that is normal, and that maybe when you are 10 years down the road in your journey, you can turn around and offer that outstretched hand for someone who is still making their way through that messy middle. Life is weird. It's a miracle any of us are here. But I can tell you, after walking that dark, dark road, that I now have the capacity to turn around and see all of the flowers that have bloomed along that path since, all of the relationships we never would have had otherwise, all of the knowledge and experience and advocating we were able to obtain and perform as a result, all of the barriers that we were able to bust through. So I see you, and I want you to know, as hard as today may be, or maybe today is easy and tomorrow's going to be the hard day. Maybe it was yesterday, but you've got this. That next step might be a shaky one to take, but it's not an impossible step. You go as slow as you need to. You walk as tenderly as you need to. And you don't let anyone shove you along further than you can go in that moment. And if they do, you send them to me. I hope anything that I shared today was helpful. I just really felt like I was supposed to share what this last 10 years has been like from this side of the messy middle. Thanks for tuning in today. This is your first Motherhood Experience podcast. Please don't think this is how it is all the time. It's not. I normally have a guest. Today, this just felt like the right thing to do. Wherever you are in your motherhood experience journey, thank you for being here with me today, and I'll catch you next time. Thank you so much for joining us on today's episode of the Motherhood Experience podcast. To join our exclusive TME community, head over to themotherhoodexperience.com/learn more. Be sure to follow The Motherhood Experience on Facebook or Instagram, and please leave us a 5-star review wherever you listen to podcasts. If you're watching on YouTube, leave us a comment below, and we'll catch you next time.